things that are important not only to me as an agriculture commissioner, but they're important to me as somebody who's asking for the voters' support to be Florida's CEO, to be Florida's governor. Someone who knows Florida best and will put Florida first. That's what it's all about.
Ask you a few questions about the governor's race.
Of course.
We're interested. Obviously, I think this is a moment, a time where the school shooting at Marjorie Douglas Stoneman High School is on everybody's mind still. There's some legislation pending in the legislature. I'm just wondering, can you tell me, I guess personally, a little bit about, have you met some of the students there? I think probably they've been part of panel discussions that you've been at. And tell me one or two of your impressions just from meeting those students.
Sure. You know, our hearts are just aching for what these students have gone through. As a father who's got 2 in high school and 2 in middle school in our public schools, it hits close to home. I've had the opportunity to meet with some of those students. I had the duty to visit the school last week, and the impressions, you know, when you think about the rawness and the sheer terror that these students felt, even if they were not in that building of the campus, to be locked in their closet for 2, 3, in one case 5 hours waiting on SWAT to clear their classroom. And then the opportunity to participate with the governor in that roundtable of public safety officials, sheriffs and police chiefs on how do we get our arms around this and prevent it from happening in the future? How do we harden our schools? How do we tear down these artificial barriers that the school and law enforcement and children and families aren't talking to each other? How do you visit a kid's school, a kid's home, somewhere between 2 dozen and 3 dozen times and not get him the mental health crisis counseling that he clearly needed? And so when you look at what the legislation is that's being debated, how do we harden our schools? How do we cut the response time? You know, the average response time of a school shooting, I'm told, is somewhere between 5 and 6 minutes. Average law enforcement response is typically almost double that. In this case, you only had 1 resource officer there. There's an investigation now about what that response was, but we have to have more school resource officers. We have to have more professional mental health counselors in our schools doing real mental health, not guidance counseling. Guidance counseling is to help you get a good job, get into the school you want to get into. I'm talking about real mental health counselors on our campuses and other things to help cut that response time, including training either retired military or reserve deputies or some other type of program that's being discussed. And of course those mental health pieces, strengthening that so that someone who is mentally unstable cannot get their hands on a firearm.
How has this whole episode changed your views on any of these issues? Has it changed any of your views?
Well, it certainly has, in the sense of exposing the gaps in understanding where our mental health needs are. It has certainly exposed these artificial barriers. When you look at the Baker Act, which is what we call it in Florida, when you temporarily commit someone involuntarily because they're a danger to themselves and others, there's some weaknesses there that allow those individuals, as soon as they're discharged, to still have access to firearms. Those need to be fixed. It's the shortage of resources going into school-based law enforcement, school safety, school hardening. There's definitely some lessons learned from this that have really become front and center as a result of this horrible tragedy.
Last year there was a column that appeared that basically said that Adam Putnam sells out to the NRA. You responded by saying, yeah, I'm a proud NRA sellout. At this point, tell me what you're thinking about that messaging, and that was it a mistake to make that messaging last year?
Look, I am a proud Second Amendment supporter.
Mm-hmm.
And I reject the notion that the millions of law-abiding citizens who exercise their Second Amendment rights should be conflated with this monster who murdered 17 people at that high school. In fact, I believe that students, young people, who grow up learning to respect and appreciate the safe handling of firearms and the damage they can do, have a much safer track record than a student who grows up in some violent video game world where it's all make-believe and fantasy until they go carry out their fantasies in real life. And so I think it's very important that people understand that individuals who hunt, individuals who collect, individuals who like to go to the range and shoot, individuals who like to pass along those values to their children and to their nieces and nephews, those are not bad people, and they should never be equated with this monster. And so what we have to do is to make sure that the mentally ill, the mentally unstable, those who are one big walking red flag, don't get their hands on a firearm because of the gaps in that mental health system or because of the bureaucratic obstacles that keep agencies from talking to each other. But make no mistake, I grew up hunting with my family, I hunt with my children, and I teach them and instill in them not only a love for that outdoor heritage, but a respect for it as well. And those two should never be conflated.
Governor Scott's administration has created, I don't know, maybe 1.5 million jobs, something like that. In his 8 years, that was obviously jobs is their focus. Could you tell me, in your view, maybe from that, has the Florida economy diversified? Is there a sector of those jobs that where you feel like we're talking about higher wage jobs, and the kind of jobs that are going to keep kids here and not just, you know, service and tourism? And some of those jobs are good jobs, but, you know, not just minimum wage jobs. So let me share with you this.
My #1 priority as the next governor of Florida is putting vocational and technical training back into the middle schools and high schools and supporting our state colleges. That's where those higher paying jobs and the good careers are going to come from. The #1 job vacancy in Florida is nursing. We can produce high school graduates who have a CNA license and they're ready to be employed, and then top off that education with a bachelor's in nursing at their local community college that's lower tuition, easier to access, and more flexible to their needs. The #3 job vacancy is heavy equipment operators and truck drivers. Welders make 6 figures. So my focus is preparing our young people not only for the world that includes universities, but also for a career, because not all of our students have to go to university. Not all of our students have to take on student loan debt. And in raising the average wage of those jobs by having the skills and the students to have good careers, we're going to rebuild the middle class in Florida. We're going to have higher paying careers in Florida, and we're going to keep more of our young people in Florida rather than having them have to move out of state to find good careers.
Florida has something like 1,350 miles of coastline.
Yeah.
Do you, and really I think the Governor Scott administration effectively took the phrase climate change out of government. What would be your approach to the concerns of sea level rise, the impacts that has already had on some parts of the state, and undoubtedly threatens to have more as we go forward?
Look, there's no question that we are seeing changes occurring. We're having to move well fields inland because of greater saltwater intrusion. We're seeing more frequent flooding as a result of the king tides. We are seeing crops grow further north than they historically have. But look, I also remember when we had freezes in the 80s that drove citrus substantially out of Volusia County. So we see these things happen, and Florida needs to be approaching this from an engineering standpoint. How do we harden? How do we make Florida more resilient for the changes that are occurring to protect our tourism industry, to re-nourish our beaches, and to make sure that agriculture and the other things that make Florida Florida can continue to thrive and do well regardless. And so I think it's important to take the politics out of it and view this as an engineering challenge that we can do here in Florida.
Well, I'm going to make this my last question. Our Volusia County's school board chair has been trying to get the legislature to change the school funding formula. I don't want to make this too left field. There's a funding formula that was put in place about, I don't know, 12 or so years ago called the District Cost Differential, DCD. I don't know if you've been hearing about this at all or not. I'm not sure what how much it resonates statewide, but really the bottom line is our Volusia County district feels like it's been losing millions and millions of dollars because of this funding formula. They feel like it's unfair. Is that something you'd be willing to look? I don't know. Tell me, is that something you're at least open to hearing? Have you heard anything about this? Is it something
Look,
on your radar at all?
I'm familiar with the FEFP,
right,
the Florida Education Funding Program, and while I'm not specifically up to speed on Volusia's issues, as someone who has worked through these issues in my own community, and my kids are in public schools, and my business is in Polk County, and Polk County has this weird situation where if you took half the county, it would qualify for more dollars as an urban county. If you took the other half the county, it would qualify for more dollars as a rural county. But when you mix them together, we've historically been punished under the funding formula. So that formula needs to constantly be reviewed for equity and for fairness to make sure that our kids are getting the resources. My kids are in public schools. My wife taught kindergarten before we started having children. We have to make sure that we're preparing our kids to compete in this economy and win.